Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at Path of Exile 2.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about this one. I think there's a lot to be excited for, whether you're, a veteran player or someone who's just kind of curious about what the hype is all about.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting release. It's a full sequel, but they've also decided to sort of keep the original game alive, so we're going to be looking at two versions of the game, essentially, forward.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's jump into it. So
All right.
first things first, the release dates. Early access is going to be dropping on December 6th, 2024, and then the full release sometime in 2025.
Yeah, and that early access is going to be pretty substantial. It's not just going to be, a small slice. We're talking the first three acts of the game, all six of the starting classes.
Yeah.
Warrior, Huntress, Sorceress, Mercenary, Druid, and Monk. Oh, and a complete endgame system.
Wow. Okay, so like a full endgame
Yeah,
system
super.
in early access, that's not something you see every day. Right. It's pretty uncommon. Most early access periods are,
Mhm.
here's the early game, go nuts. But this seems like they're really confident in that core gameplay loop. And they want to get people testing that end game right away, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder what that means for those who are going to be waiting for that full release in 2025. So
Mm.
for the full game, we're looking at 6 acts, 12 character classes total,
Oh, wow.
and over 25 hours of playtime.
That's a pretty meaty game.
Yeah, so it sounds like they are really going all out with the sequel.
Absolutely. This is not just like an expansion pack.
Yeah.
They're building on what they already have. But it seems like they're really trying to make this a standalone experience as well.
For sure. So how do we get in on this early access action? Well, there's two ways to do it. The first is the classic supporter pack route, but the second way is a little bit more interesting. If you've already spent $480 or more on microtransactions in the original Path of Exile, you get early access to the PC version for free.
Yeah, so that's pretty neat for the veterans.
Yeah, that is pretty neat. It's a nice little bonus. But it does kind of make you wonder, like, is Path of Exile 2 going to be, you know, super focused on whales now? I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think that's something to keep an eye on for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it's great that they're rewarding their loyal players,
Yeah.
but yeah, it makes you wonder a little bit about the direction they're going.
Yeah. And speaking of those supporter packs, there are 6 tiers to choose from. They range from $30 all the way up to, you guessed it, $480.
Yeah.
And the rewards you get, things like premium currency,
Mm.
cosmetics, that stuff is going to work in both Path of Exile 1 and 2.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, so that's kind of nice. Even if you're not sure about Path of Exile 2 yet, you can still get some value out of those supporter packs.
Yeah, that does kind of soften the blow a little
Yeah.
bit, especially at those higher price points.
Okay, so let's say you've secured your early access, you're ready to jump in. How do you actually reach the end game in Path of Exile 2?
So it's a little more involved than just hitting the max level. You're actually going to have to complete the 3-act campaign twice. First run can be on any difficulty, just to get you to level 45. But then you have to do it again on cruel difficulty.
So they're really making you earn it.
Yeah, it seems like they want players to really understand the game's mechanics before they unleash them on that end game content.
Yeah. No more just kind of like breezing through to maps.
Right. You have to learn how to play the game.
Okay, so speaking of that end game content, are you ready for this? 7 distinct systems.
Wow.
We've got Breach, Ritual, Delirium, Expedition, Trial of the Sakimas, Trial of the Chaos.
And of course, the Pinnacle Boss.
Oh, yes, the Pinnacle Boss. That's going to be the big one, right?
Yeah, that's the one they're really hyping up. They're saying it's going to be the toughest challenge in the entire game.
Oh, wow.
You need 3
Yeah.
keys to even access it,
3 keys.
which, that already tells you something.
Yeah, so this is going to be like the ultimate challenge.
Yeah, the ultimate bragging rights.
Okay, so 7 endgame systems. I mean, that sounds great on paper, but I'm a little bit wary. Path of Exile 1 had some systems that, they felt a little bit tacked on. How do we know this isn't just going to be a ton of bloat?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think we're going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. Hopefully, all of these systems feel distinct and rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. So let's break down a couple of these systems, starting with the Atlas. Now, this isn't just your regular old map. This is basically like a giant skill tree that you unlock by playing the game.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so each node on the Atlas is a different zone with its own challenges, and you get to decide which paths to open up.
So it's not just a static map. It's something that actually evolves as you play.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll be using waystones to navigate. They're kind of like checkpoints, but they also unlock new areas as you go.
So it's a bit like choosing your own adventure then.
Yeah, kind of, but with way more monsters. And loot explosions.
You gotta have that loot.
Of course. And it's not just about killing monsters and getting that loot. There are also NPCs scattered throughout the Atlas. They offer quests, valuable items, and even crafting opportunities.
So it's adding a bit of a social element to the end game as well, which is nice.
Yeah, I like that. It's not just about, you know, grinding mindlessly. There's a bit more to it. You can interact with the world. You can complete objectives.
Makes us feel a bit more alive.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sold on the Atlas. It sounds like they're taking everything that we loved about the original and turning it up to 11. But what about these Atlas skill trees? What can we actually do with those?
So as you explore the Atlas
Yeah.
and you complete challenges, you're going to earn points that you can invest into these skill trees. And these skill trees let you customize your entire endgame experience.
Oh, wow.
So if you want to make the game harder,
Harder.
but get better loot,
Okay.
there's a node for that.
All right.
So you can really tailor the experience to your liking.
Wow, that's amazing. So what kind of customizations are we talking about here?
Well, we don't have all the details yet. But imagine, pushing monster density to the max.
Okay.
You're constantly swarmed,
Oh, wow.
but the loot is incredibly valuable.
All right. So.
Or maybe you want to focus on specific types of encounters
Mhm.
or unlock unique challenges. It's really up to you.
That's insane that they're really giving players a lot of control over their endgame.
Yeah, it seems like they really want to make sure that there's something for everyone, no matter what your playstyle is.
For sure. All right. So we've got the Atlas, we've got the skill trees, and then we've got these 7 crazy endgame systems to tackle. Let's dive into a couple of those, starting with Breach. Now, I know a lot of players are really excited for this one to return.
Yeah, Breach was a fan favorite for sure.
Yeah, and for good reason, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't love chaotic rifts that just spew out hordes of
It's
monsters?
just good fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're back with a twist in Path of Exile too. Imagine those breaches, but even more dynamic and unpredictable.
Okay, so even more monsters, even more loot.
Exactly.
Yeah, sign me up, late. So what about some of the newer systems, like Ritual?
So Ritual is all about strategic decision-making. You're going to be presented with a series of altars, each offering different rewards and challenges. You choose which rituals to activate. But be careful, because that difficulty scales up really fast.
So it's kind of like a high-stakes gamble. You could walk away with some amazing treasure, or you could end up getting completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be careful.
Okay, I like that. It adds another layer of tension to the gameplay.
Yeah, it's not just about brute force anymore. You have to think strategically.
For sure. All right, so let's talk about something that's been getting a lot of buzz. Delirium. What's the deal with this system?
Delirium is all about pushing your limits.
Yeah.
It introduces a fog of war mechanic
Okay.
that obscures your vision and ramps up the difficulty significantly.
So it's basically like Path of Exile's hardcore mode, but even more intense.
You could say that. It's designed to test the skills of even the most hardcore players.
Hmm.
But the loot is supposed to be incredible.
Oh, wow. So risk versus reward. Okay, I like that. I'm sensing a theme here with these systems.
They're giving players a lot of choice in terms of how challenging they want the end game to be.
For sure. Okay, so what about expeditions?
So expeditions are all about exploration and uncovering lost artifacts. You'll be working with an explorer NPC who guides you through these uncharted territories. You're battling dangerous foes and uncovering ancient treasures.
Okay, so it sounds like a little bit of a change of pace from the usual grind.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. What kind of artifacts can we expect to find?
They're being a little bit secretive about that, but they've hinted at some pretty powerful and unique items.
Intriguing. Okay, so we got 2 more systems to cover. Trial of the Sakimas and Trial of the Chaos.
Right, so these trials are designed to test your combat skills and your mastery of the game's mechanics. They're essentially elaborate combat puzzles
Okay.
that require precise, timing strategic thinking and a deep understanding of your character's abilities.
So it's like boss fights on steroids.
Yeah, pretty much. They're not going to be easy, but overcoming them is supposed to be very rewarding.
All right, let's circle back to the Pinnacle boss for a minute. You mentioned it's the toughest challenge in the game. What makes it so difficult?
Well, we don't have all the details yet, but from what they've shown, it has multiple phases, each with its own unique mechanics and attacks.
So it's not just about having the best gear and build.
Right.
You're going to have to really understand the fight and adapt your strategy as you go.
Yeah, it's going to be a true test of skill.
Okay. And you mentioned something about needing 3 keys to even access the Pinnacle boss.
Yeah, those keys are said to be incredibly rare, and you can only get them by completing specific challenges throughout the Atlas.
So they're really gating this content.
Yeah, they want to make sure that only the most dedicated players have a shot at taking down the pinnacle boss.
So it's like the ultimate endgame goal.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we've got all these incredible endgame systems, this dynamic atlas to explore, and this skill tree that lets us customize everything. But let's not forget about the core of Path of Exile, the character classes. What can we expect there?
Well, in early access, we're going to be starting with 6 familiar classes: Warrior, Huntress, Sorceress, Mercenary, Druid, and Monk. Each class has been reworked and rebalanced for Path of Exile 2.
So even veteran players are going to have to learn some new tricks.
Oh yeah, for sure. They've made some significant changes to the skill system. They're aiming for even more flexibility and build diversity.
Interesting. So even though we're starting with familiar classes, it sounds like they're going to feel pretty different.
Yeah, I think so. They're building on the foundation of the original game,
Sure.
but they're also introducing some new ideas that are going to keep things fresh.
Cool. And then in the full release, we get 6 more classes to play with, bringing the total to 12.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That's a lot of variety.
They really want to make sure that there's a class and a play style for everyone.
Okay, so we've got all these classes, this revamped skill system. What kind of crazy builds are we going to be able to create in Path of Exile 2?
That's the exciting part, right? They're keeping a lot of the details under wraps for now, but they have hinted at some pretty incredible new skill combinations and mechanics.
Like what?
Give us a taste. Well, they mentioned something called shape-shifting for the Druid class.
Shape-shifting.
Yeah, imagine transforming into a powerful bear or werewolf,
Okay.
unleashing these devastating attacks on your enemies.
Oh, that sounds awesome. What about the monk class? What kind of unique mechanics are we going to see there?
So the monk is all about martial arts mastery and harnessing inner energy. They've shown off some pretty impressive combos and special attacks.
Okay, cool. I'm getting some serious kung fu vibes here.
Yeah, exactly. They're really leaning into that martial arts fantasy.
Awesome. All right, so we've got shape-shifting druids, we've got kung fu monks, and a whole lot of other crazy stuff that they haven't even revealed yet. I'm getting seriously hyped for this.
Me too. And this is just what we know so far. There's going to be so much more to discover.
Yeah, I can't wait. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I think it's time to take a step back, digest all this information, and maybe speculate a little bit.
Mm.
If you had to pick one thing that you think is going to make or break Path of Exile 2, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I think it all comes down to the execution of those 7 endgame systems.
Yeah, we touched on this earlier. Those systems need to feel distinct and rewarding.
Exactly. If they can nail that balance
Yeah,
and create an endgame that's truly engaging and diverse,
yeah,
then I think Path of Exile 2 has the potential to be something really special.
for sure. All right, so the pressure is on for grinding gear games to deliver on those in-game systems, but from what we've seen so far, I'm feeling pretty optimistic.
Me too. It's
Yeah.
got a proven track record. And they seem to be really listening to player feedback. I think they're on the right track.
All right, well, that's great to hear. I'm definitely excited to see how it all turns out. All right, so we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we're going to dive into the story, the characters. We're going to tackle the big question. Is Path of Exile 2 pay to win?
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Path of Exile 2. So before the break, we were talking about all the different systems and mechanics, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about the story. Path of Exile has always had such a rich and intricate lore, so I'm really curious to see what kind of narrative they're weaving into this sequel.
Yeah, they're definitely not skimping on the story in Path of Exile 2. It picks up 20 years after the events of the original game, and the world of Rayclast is in pretty bad shape. A new generation of exiles has to rise up and face some ancient evils to try and restore balance to the world.
Okay, so it's not just about grinding for loot this time, we're saving the world too.
Well, there's always going to be loot involved. It's
Yeah.
Path of Exile after all.
That's true. But I'm curious to see how they're going to tie this new storyline into all the endgame systems we talked about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, will we be uncovering pieces of the story as we explore the Atlas? Will our choices in those endgame systems have a lasting impact on the world? It's hard to say for sure. But knowing grinding gear games, they're going to have some surprises up their sleeve.
I'm sure they will. I'm really interested to see how they incorporate the lore into the new character classes as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like they've already said that the druids' shape-shifting abilities are tied to ancient rituals and pacts with nature spirits.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a cool gameplay mechanic. It's actually rooted in the lore of the world.
Exactly.
That's awesome. What about the monk? How does their backstory tie into the overall narrative?
So the monk is a member of an ancient order that's dedicated to preserving balance and fighting against corruption. They've been training for centuries to confront the evils that are threatening Rayclast.
Okay, so they're like the Jedi Knights of Path of Exile.
Yeah, kinda.
I like it. It sounds like they're really putting a lot of thought into making each class feel like a unique and integral part of the world.
Yeah, they don't want them to just feel like random collections of skills and abilities.
Right.
They want them to have a real place in the lore.
Awesome. Okay, so we've talked about the story, the characters, the systems. Everything seems amazing so far. But, you know me, I gotta ask the tough questions. There's been a lot of talk about the price of those supporter packs, especially that top tier $480 one. Some people are worried that Path of Exile 2 is becoming a pay to win game. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I understand the concern, but it's important to remember that Path of Exile has always been a free-to-play game with optional cosmetic microtransactions. The supporter packs are really just a way for players to support the development of the game and get some exclusive cosmetic items in return.
So, the $480 pack isn't giving players any kind of gameplay advantage.
Nope, purely cosmetic. The only gameplay benefit is the early access to the PC version, which is also available to players who have spent $480 or more on microtransactions in the original game.
Okay, so it's more like a thank you to dedicated players
Right.
rather than a way to give them an edge over everyone else.
Exactly. And it's also important to note that all of the gameplay content in Path of Exile 2 will be accessible to all players,
Yeah.
regardless of whether they purchase a supporter pack or not.
Okay, good. I know some people were worried about that.
Yeah, I think there was some misinformation going around. Grinding Gear Games has been very clear that they are committed to keeping Path of Exile a fair and balanced game for all players.
All right, that's good to hear. I'm glad they're sticking to their principles. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are you most excited about in Path of Exile 2?
Honestly, I'm just excited to see how it all comes together. The scope of this game is just mind-boggling. And I can't wait to see how all these different systems and characters and storylines intertwine to create, a truly immersive and epic experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm particularly excited to see how the community embraces this new chapter in the Path of Exile saga. I mean, we've already seen so much creativity and ingenuity from players in the original game, and I can't wait to see what kind of crazy builds and strategies they come up with in Path of Exile too.
Oh yeah, it's going to be wild.
It's going to be an exciting ride, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that's a wrap on our Path of Exile 2 deep dive. We've covered a ton of information today, from release dates and early access to endgame systems, character classes, and even a bit of lore speculation. I don't know about you, but I'm absolutely buzzing with anticipation for December 6th.
Me too. I'm sure we'll have plenty more to talk about as we get closer to release.
Until then, keep those theories coming, keep those hype levels high, and we'll see you all in Rayclast. All right, so we're back.
Back again.
And, we've talked about all the mechanics, we've talked about all the endgame systems, but one thing we haven't really touched on too much is the story. And I think that's something that's really important to a lot of Path of Exile players. The lore is so rich and intricate. So I'm curious, what kind of narrative are they building into Path of Exile 2?
Yeah, no, they're not shying away from story in this one at all. It's a full continuation. 20 years after the original campaign, Class is still in a rough spot.
Yeah.
And it's up to a new generation of exiles to kind of deal with the fallout and face some seriously ancient baddies to try and set things right.
So it's not just about the loot Rhine this time. We're actually saving the world.
I mean, there's always going to be loot.
Of course. It's Path of Exile.
But yeah, there's a bigger narrative at play for sure.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how they tie that into all these endgame systems.
Right. Are we going to be piecing together the story as we explore the Atlas? Do the choices we make in those endgame systems, actually affect the world? I mean, knowing Grinding Gear Games, there's got to be some cool narrative twists and turns in there.
Oh, for sure. And one thing I'm really curious about is how they're incorporating the lore into these new character classes.
Oh, yeah. For example, we know the druid's shape-shifting is tied to these ancient rituals and pacts with nature spirits.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's not just a random gameplay mechanic they threw in there. It's actually part of the world.
Right. It's grounded in the lore.
I love that. What about the monk? How does their story fit in?
So the monks, part of this ancient order dedicated to keeping balance and fighting corruption, they've basically been training for centuries to deal with this stuff.
Okay, so they're the Jedi of Path of Exile.
Pretty much.
It sounds like they're really putting a lot of thought into making each class feel like an actual part of the world.
Yeah, and not just a set of skills.
Right, exactly.
They have a backstory. They have a reason for being there.
It makes it more immersive.
For sure.
Okay, so we've talked to story, characters, all these awesome systems. But you know me, I always got to ask tough questions. There's been a lot of talk about the price of those supporter packs, especially that top tier $480 one. And some people were is Path of Exile 2 becoming pay to win?
Yeah, I get that concern, especially with that price tag.
Yeah.
But you gotta remember, Path of Exile has always been free to play,
Hmm.
and the microtransactions have always been cosmetic. So these supporter packs are really just a way for players to
Hmm.
support the development, and get some exclusive cosmetics.
Okay, so that $480 pack isn't actually giving players any kind of gameplay advantage?
No, it's purely cosmetic. The only gameplay benefit is that early access on PC, which, like we said, you could also get if you spent enough in the original game.
Right, right. So it's more like a thank you to dedicated players.
Exactly. A way to reward them for their support. And, to be fair, all the gameplay content in Path of Exile 2 will be accessible to everyone, whether they buy a pack or not.
Okay, that's good. I know some people were worried about like being locked out of content.
Right. Now, Grinding Gear Games has been pretty clear about that. They want to keep Path of Exile fair and balanced for everyone.
Awesome. All right, well, that's reassuring. So as we wrap up this whole deep dive, what are you most excited for in Path of Exile 2?
You know, honestly, just seeing how it all comes together, like the scale of this game is insane. And I just can't wait to experience all these different systems and characters and storylines, see how they all intertwine.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also really excited to see what the community does with it. And we've
Yeah.
seen so much creativity from players in the original Path of Exile. I can't wait to see what kind of crazy builds and strategies people come up with for Path of Exile 2.
Oh, it's going to be wild.
It's going to be awesome.
Definitely.
All right, folks. Well, that wraps up our deep dive on Path of Exile 2. We've covered so much today. Release dates, early access, endgame systems, character classes, lore. We talked about it all. I don't know about you, but I am so hyped for December 6th.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Can't wait to jump in and explore Rayclast all over again.
And to be epic.
All right, well, until then, keep the hype going.
Yeah.
And we'll see you all in Rayclast.